All right. Thank you very much. And thanks to our panelists. There was actually such a mouthful, but there were more things that that we have in common than things that really divide us. So I want us to, if all of you, the 5 panelists, can think of 1 or 2 things that you want to share in 2 minutes. So if we can be brief on this, that stood out for you, that you thought there's synergy. I mean, you could see what you are doing at your institution and that there's synergy across some of the other institutions that presented this afternoon. So I thought if we can start with that, and then we'll take the conversation from there, and then we'll take a few. I'm just going to ask Dr. Hart to assist me when the questions are in the chat so that I don't miss the opportunity for some of the questions. And if we go over time, then we can always hold over some of the key questions into tomorrow's session. So we'll do it in the same order. Dr. Daumens, I'll start with you.
Thank you, Prof. Lawack. I think this also to commend the amount of work being done across institutions. I'm relatively new to the higher education space, and then I think because engagement, the upping of the engagement mandate has become such an important strategic priority of institutions. I think the different typographies or approaches around how to make sense of the best ways, it's extremely enriching to that particular conversation. I also want to then also reflect on that the need for support institutionally from management, executive is also a wonderful enabler of the different type of spaces. But I also want to add, and I know I'm not sure our colleagues have experienced this too, perhaps the one important thing is having a particular space or office to play a very collaborative and facilitative role around making sense on how this could land in the different strategic architectures of the institution, because we recognize that the space is extremely contested philosophically, ideologically, methodologically as well. And we are learning that if you want to nurture through a multidisciplinary type of collaboration, we need actually a holding space to play that careful, facilitatory, collaborative role as well. Thanks, Prof.
That's very useful. Thank you very much, Dr. Daumens. Dr. Leeuwendaal, Ruben.
I'm not sure the Ruby Ann has left. She's traveling back to preview about.
Oh, actually,
so we did.
But you are in a muse, so it's okay.
Okay, so if she can, she will. But I'll just make that apology now because she just left now.
No problem. Prof. Busi, Mandleni.
Okay. I think this time I'm able to show my face. I totally forgot to show my face when I was doing the presentation. First, I just want to commend the presenters, the panelists. The information I can really concur with our chairperson. It was quite informative, and also to learn what other institutions are doing in terms of engaged scholarship towards social transformation. What stood out for me from this presentation, from the presentations, was the aspect of reciprocity. And really, if we are to decolonize the curricula, that is the only way to go. And also the importance of creating an understanding amongst our internal stakeholders that we are all in this game and we have to work together in order to realize the outputs that are going to influence the curriculum that you are doing. And also the importance of valuing our communities, because if we co-create the knowledge and new knowledge, it means our communities are partners that we value and we engage ethically with him, which is very, very important. In other words, we're moving from that old way of engaging our partners as inferior, but because now they are, to a certain extent, knowledge holders, and therefore it's very important for us to value that as our partners in the university. And also what stood out for me is the theory of change that Dr. Bruce alluded to, because at the end of the day, we want to take along our communities when we for social transformation. And then that theory of change has to be very much inculcated in our communities. And also, if we could maybe collaborate in that space, I would really appreciate, so that we can take our communities with the hand through that theory of change. So that is basically what stood out for me in this presentation, but all of the presentations were very good. Thank you.
Thank you very much. They were really complimentary. Mrs. Munsami?
Thank you. First of all, thank you to all the colleagues. It was good to see you in the virtual space again. And one thing that stood out is that whilst we are in different provinces and so forth, there's so much of synergy as well as difference, if I could say that. And one thing that sort of stood out for me was the humanizing community engagement, which I've been a strong proponent of. And you know that we must hear the community's voice and so forth. And the other thing I'd like to learn more about is the hubs of convergence and the anchor strategy, more about it, like how does it impact on the community, and what difference does it make by having an anchor strategy, and the database, because I've been battling to get a database up and running for I don't know how long, and I have a couple of times abandoned it as well. So maybe it's time for me to pick up again. But thank you very much. Yes, there's been a few, but I really liked the idea, and then also the transdisciplinary approaches as well.
Thank you very, very much. And then I think our colleague, Ms. Purcell from CPUT.
Thank you so much. I'm not sure if you can see me, but I'm not going to repeat what my learned colleagues have said, because I think there are quite a lot of likes for some of these issues. I wanted to say to Bruce that your statement that everyone has something to offer approach is something that stood out for me. And it reminds me of that sense of belonging that we want to inculcate in our partnerships, and also when we treat students as if they are sort of empty vessels, and yet they have so much to bring to the table in community engagement. So thank you, Bruce, and then please convey my appreciation to Ruby Ann also for the presentation on the transformation barometer, because I think as we progress over the years, and many of my colleagues have forgotten, I think, that community engagement is actually rooted in transformatory discourse. So thank you for putting that very strongly on the table. And then to Busi, I think you've made tremendous strides, and I'm so interested to learn from you and to see what the work that you've been doing in terms of social transformation. Both you and Priscilla mentioned the scholarship of engagement by Boyer, and I think that the NRF's Engage Research Framework was actually built or developed from the scholarship of engagement. And I think with Jiva, what an inspirational presentation, Jiva. You also mentioned, which is in our Vision 2030, the quadruple helix partnerships. which is also a fairly new concept as far as the development of the sea space is. And you've got such a lot of exciting projects, which I'm sure we can learn from. You also mentioned the sustainable livelihood approach, which I will go back to again to refresh myself. And thank you for those important inputs that you have shared with us. And I think, Priscilla, I'm also very interested in the database and how to manage all this information. Currently, we are using SharePoint, and I'm not sure if that is as effective as the model that you have developed. So, just from me, I feel very hopeful and inspired by the contributions, and definitely this has also been a learning experience for me as well. Thank you, colleagues. Thank you, panel.
Thank you very much, Shaki. I believe that Rubian is back. Dr. Levenda, what we're doing is just a 2-minute or so. What stood out for you from the different presentations, or those that you were able to, 1 or 2 things that you want to mention during the time that you could attend this afternoon? And then Priscilla can then be the last one.
Okay, thank you very much. Chair, are you able to hear me?
Yes, I can. Go ahead.
Oh, awesome. Okay, so I must say that the level of community involvement that's happening, or community engagement that is happening across the institutions was awe-inspiring for me. And I think the aspect that came out in terms of synergies was the relationalities and the humanizing way in which we are doing our community engagement. Is no longer, the popping in and popping out, but actually recognizing the value of our partners, and then obviously also breaking down of the silos and bringing together individuals from across the institution. And by the way, not only from academia, also our support services staff as well. And then what I really liked, and I suppose this is where Priscilla had put my attention at the higher education conference, was around the database, because it is a way of, I won't say collating, but getting every element that is involved with community engagement, getting all of that information within a database that can then be utilized and extracted in various ways, either for reporting, for proposal writing, and so forth. And that for me, I think is something that would really be of value within the sector, and will also even promote further collaboration between institutions, because that is also an element of transformation, is inter-institutional collaboration. And then lastly, Chair, I have not heard this, but for me, what is really of concern is the funding formula, where engagement is not, as much as it is the third pillar, core pillar of university, the sector does not necessarily fund it as it would teaching and learning. So in terms of the subsidy, where in the subsidy for higher education is there funding being provided for this? Because as was stated by our colleagues, the panelists, there is utter dependence on funders to provide funding for this type of endeavors. And so for me, I think that is something that should also maybe be challenged, in terms of how we had done things before at sectoral level, and how it could possibly change, especially if we look at white paper 3 and how we are wanting to make a difference within society. Thanks so much, Chair.
Thank you very much, Ruby, and I'm glad that you could join us. Priscilla, your few cents worth on this one?
I am so amazed by first of all, I want to say the language. I think that we think that we don't have a similar language, but I have made notes about that we do have a similar language, and I do believe that we are being driven by similar values and principles. For me, that is very important because I like to look at what is similar more. And I think what also came out through all the presentations for me was that each university looked at its university culture, because you can't transport something and just go and apply it somewhere else. So I think that becomes very important, is that we realize what are the things that are similar and what are the things that are different. And what I liked was the epistemological humility that Bruce mentioned. And I think that is something I would like him to share with all of us. And then we can identify where he got it from. But it just shows me again that Africa is important, because there's some of the language that could enrich our discussions. And then I think one of the other things that for me was important that everybody spoke about was innovation. And I think that the scholarship of engagement is not going to be successfully institutionalized without innovative ideas. And so I think it's important for us to have more of these kind of platforms where we can share our innovative ideas on how we are approaching some of the challenges, because some of our challenges are similar. So the funding one, you know, that is something we need. That's why UCG Grants is paying for this. So we also get money from all over. You give us money and we get money. So it is very difficult to drive this process, and that's what makes it take longer. So even if you think, how would we only into the operationalization of our process now because of funding issues? I mean, we could have moved much faster if we had the money. So you're right, you know, I think funding is so for me. And then the last thing, Prof, I wanted to say, the Ubuntu, remember our graduate attributes, and people were saying, why do you want to put Ubuntu in? And was all that discussion. And then I listened to everybody, and there's Ubuntu in their graduate attributes. So for me, I think that is just absolutely amazing. So I'm inspired. Thank you to everybody.
Thank you very much, Priscilla. I also smiled when I saw the Ubuntu appearing and the long discussions we had, and that's the framing part of our graduate attributes, and the framing part in our curriculum transformation renewal framework is around decoloniality. And the what I wanted to ask before we get the questions, Dr. Cornell Hart was very instrumental for us also in development of our framework and taking our work further around the knowledge management tool that we have. Cornell, you want to say something about funding, because everybody spoke about funding. And maybe this is now our sort of clarion call to say, maybe Ruby Ann, it shouldn't be about the 3 pillars, but how do we ensure, and that's been our approach, how do we ensure that we integrate and that engagement is not separately from the knowledge project, your learning and your teaching, as well as your research. So now, Cornell, if you want to add to that, and then I want to see if there's a question or two before Anita kicked me off the platform.
Thank you, Prof, and thank you, colleagues. Yes, I think it's very important that we do sort of interrogate the issue around funding. And it's because of the manner in which the so-called 3rd pillar came about in legislation so many years ago and where it is currently. And I think as long as we as higher education institutions look at funding as a separate funding stream, we will always be short funded. And that's from that premise that we looked at it at UWC to say, but what does it mean to integrate? And you've always mentioned it's infused, it's part of our DNA. And so what does it mean if we really integrate engaged scholarship in all forms of scholarship? Hence the model of UWC, where we say the last form of scholarship is if you achieve the other four. And so when we did the knowledge management system, one of the things that we did as a tool is for people to cost a project. Any project. If it's something that I do in my classroom, if it's something that I do with colleagues on campus, on another campus, because we often don't cost what we call sweat equity, because so many of these projects is either part of a curriculum or part of an engagement or volunteering, etc. And so I think it's important that we look at that. Also because the NRF has done away with the separate funding stream for community engagement. And it's because they say it must be impactful on society, no matter what grant you are doing. And so in the NRF, if you now not submit a grant proposal that indicates what is your alignment at local level, at regional level, and at international level, what will be your impact, they don't even shortlist your proposal. And so hence why we decided for the portal, it's about putting a tool there to how to cost, what are the aspects that you must cost, and then where is your footprint, where's your impact. So I think that's important. I also think it's important to take note of Council for Higher Education, who's put together a community of expert practitioners recently. The committee will start soon. It's the last of several, but this is a committee that will develop norms and standards for community engagement and innovation. So a lot of us are familiar with the communities of expert practitioners for norms and standards for all curriculums. We're moving away from exit level outcomes. We now speak to norms and standards. But CHE also realized that the white paper and all the legislation, it's wonderful, but it doesn't benchmark. And so hopefully from that, I think a lot of issues are going to come up, and it will give an equal status to engaged scholarship to that of research and learning and teaching. And I think for that, we must also look at how do we join forces more than just those of us who are here today that shared and those who are in attendance. How do we develop position papers to influence policy, to communicate to USAF, to communicate to CHE? How do we lobby for all of this? And I think lastly, just what stood out for me, and it's back to funding, and so many panelists spoke of it, is co-creation, indigenous knowledge, etc., which is based on ethical research. And that if I'm an ethical scholar with social transformation and justice as my ethos, automatically I would approach it in an equitable partnership. And I think that's something we must maybe look at for future colloquiums or some of our partnership institutions that are here, that we someday get together and really grapple about how do we go about ethical research, ethical teaching and learning, in other words, ethical scholarship. Because of this money-driven machine that we feel we are forced with or tagged along with. And I remember last year you ignited quite a conversation in the academic week for the day when we just briefly spoke about memorandums of understanding and ethics into going into partnerships. But I think one should look at ethical practice in all three pillars. Thank you, Prof.
Thank you very much, Cornell. It's very interesting. We put up some of these things beforehand, and then we think we're going to do this on the second day, but we're actually already touching on what we ideally would like to do tomorrow. Anita, can I take one question before you take over from me? I think, or at least mention, Mary Lucy, you want to, lovely seeing you virtually again. You was talking about funding for engagement is always a challenge. You're reminding us that it's a global issue and it's not insurmountable. And you also agree with Ubuntu. You want to say something there about the fact that it's not insurmountable, Or do you, would you be able to attend tomorrow so that you can expand on that? Okay, but if you want to say a sentence or two now, Mary Lucy. And are you in Missouri at the moment?
Yes, I am in Missouri, and I'll just, I have no idea what my view will look like, but I'll turn on the camera anyway. So, thank you. And I think Cornell addressed it well in the sense that we have to look at it from an integrated perspective, and even doing so, it is a challenge. But we can't just rely on government appropriations, although it's really critical that we're always advocating and always working to address that system. But in partnering with communities, with other partners, other stakeholders, often we end up with, sources of funding sometimes for those smaller projects, whether it's in the classroom or with students. But, and I absolutely agree about paying attention to the ethics and not letting the money totally drive where we go. But we have to approach it from a standpoint of hope, a standpoint of always working to look for all of the possibilities and working to change the system. So thank you, and a great job, everyone.
Thank you very much, Mary Lucy, from our partner, University of Missouri. Anita, I'm going to maybe just remind our colleagues what we are going to do tomorrow. So with what we had done today was to look at our own institutions. So as you reflect on today, our panelists, if we can then shift to our higher education sector, and what other HEIs can learn from us and from the conversations that we would be having, both that we had today and then tomorrow. So the first part would be, in everything that you've presented and what you've heard, what would you think the best practices at your institution would be that would actually benefit other HEIs to fostering engaged scholarship and driving positive change? Then reflections, we've done a bit of that during day one. But now, besides the reflections, so how do we use these reflections for the future direction of engaged scholarship within our sector? And then maybe, and beyond, because we also have our international partners here. And then it was interesting about language. Some of our language converged. Some of our language were different, but we were, in essence, sometimes saying the same things. So if you could think of what are those key concepts and principles that should be incorporated if we really want to have a collaborative, institutionalized engagement, not only in our own institutions, but across the sector. Because tomorrow I do think that ultimately I would like to put some ways that I've been thinking about how one can take this forward in the sector. Cornell touched on one of them, but there are other ways in which I think that we are not competing in this space. We are actually adding to the wonderful work that's already taking place in our institutions. So with those few words, I also want to thank you. It's been an incredible, it's actually quite overwhelming. I took a lot of notes. And what we will then do is I'll hand over to Dr. Morton, and then we'll join each other again at 2 o'clock tomorrow afternoon. Thank you, colleagues.